The wonderful thing about this Nerval book is that it could have been written yesterday.
What I love in Nerval is this sense of going elsewhere, going to another place, be it across the border, be it linguistically across the border, be it psychically, psychologically across the border. He's a border crosser and doesn't recognize these strictures that, stayed proper, healthy, I guess, quote-unquote, bourgeois life. We live by these strictures. He scares me, too.
So, I mean, my interest in Nerval is I'm fascinated with Proust's take on Nerval as a poet of memory and of a poet of place and a poet of childhood. I love the surrealist version of Nerval, Van Gogh, in that alternate tradition of martyrs, of society. But then this project is about, the more I worked on Nerval, I realized Nerval was actually a functioning man of letters who lived off his journalism, and in fact did not live off in this surrealist world of dream, and not necessarily even, a kind of a Proustian aesthete, but, a guy who is like many writers of the 19th century, eking out his existence through journalism. Here's a little detail. The frontispiece is from this book is about Nerval's wild goose chase after a book that he saw at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which existed, right? That he saw in the Frankfurt Book Fair in early 1850 while he was in Germany, where he was being honored as the translator of Faust. He didn't buy the damn book, and he probably should have, and now he's trying to find it in the Bibliothèque Nationale. He cannot find it. It has been misshelved. The name of the author has been misspelled, and so this is an entire kind of odyssey in pursuit of a missing book, which finally he manages to locate and buy at an auction at the very end, right? And having bought it at an auction, he then donates it to the Bibliothèque Nationale that has, permanently misshelved it. The history of the Abbé de Buquois indeed exists. I shall locate it in due course. This is the book he's searching for. Still, I continue to be amazed that in a city such as Paris, a center of learning, whose public libraries house some 2 million volumes, it is proved impossible to lay my hands on a French book I happened to read in Frankfurt, but alas did not purchase. Books tend to be vanishing into thin air these days, given the liberal lending policies of libraries, and also given the gradual extinction of the tribe of art and book collectors ever since the Revolution. Benjamin. Whether by hook or by crook, all the bibliographical rarities are ending up in Holland, Germany, or Russia. It's too late in the season to set off on some long journeys, so I shall simply limit my research to the 40-kilometer radius around Paris.
I think this was a man of extreme sensibility, nervous sensibility as well, that perhaps bordered on what could be called madness, I guess, that was sometimes under the control and sometimes not under control. But he opens doors for us. Just that line, right. Dream is a second life.
My thing about Nerval is to historicize him, and this is kind of a new historicist Nerval to recover the real political moment here in the Second Republic, of a Nerval, who was actually known as this performance artist in journalism. They thought of him as the French Sterne. So let me just read you one little passage. It's hard to kind of excerpt from this book. Actually, it's a passage about a snake oil salesman. It's pretty patent medicine, I mean, we're like in the American 19th century here, sort of. And you'll see he talks about a scene he once witnessed in a public square. This happens in Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, which is the little church just behind the Louvre. It's actually, this is right at the metro station of Louvre-Rivoli, because this is a very specific topographical. A snake oil salesman used to set up shop every day on the square of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. I imagine this would be prohibited these days. Police state. First he would set up his table on a pair of sawhorses, then he would pull 3 birds out of a crate, taking great care to caress them gently, one after another with his hands, pretending to lull them to sleep. When the birds appeared to have reached a state of utter immobility, he would call his audience around him by making little tweeting sounds that he produced by means of a tiny bird whistle hidden in his cheeks. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you can all see, I have just put these birds to sleep. They have been trained to remain completely motionless for several hours. So that the audience can fully appreciate the serenity they have achieved, I will leave them in this state until I have managed to sell 20 bottles of this patent medicine, which will not only destroy all insects, but cure all illnesses. This patter, though familiar to most, nonetheless always impressed a certain number of gawkers. The sale of 20 vials at 50 centimes apiece was pretty much the maximum the quack could hope for. As a result, after a few vials had been sold, the crowd usually thinned out, and all that remained were the usual hangers-on, curious to see what might happen next, but worldly enough not to allow themselves to be separated from a half a franc. The salesman, unable to unload a decent number of vials, would snatch up his 3 sleeping birds in a fit of pique and shut them back into their crate, complaining about how bad business was these days. The people who had gathered around said, "They're not asleep, they're dead," or "They're just stuffed birds," or "He probably slipped them a potion." One day, the crowd was finally reduced to a single spectator, one of those Parisian street urchins who won't take no for an answer and always wants to get to the bottom of things. The birds were just being put back into their crate when some out-of-towners chanced by and bought up a far more than the requisite 20 vials. Since they had not heard the first portion of the patter, they left the scene without demanding to see the birds wake up again and go back to work in front of the public. But the urchin hadn't missed a trick. Having carefully counted up the number of bottles that had been sold, he sauntered up to the table and he said, "So what about the birds?" The salesman looked at him with a mixture of contempt and compassion, proceeded to close up the crate, and addressed the child with a well-known phrase in argot, which I won't quote here out of respect for the ladies, but which more or less meant, "Get a life."
Richard, as a translator, has this incredible ability to move from the left-handed zone to the right-handed zone, and to situate these fleeting impressions or texts from elsewhere.
P.S. Would you be afraid to insert the continuation of the tale of the great aunt of the Abbé de Puquois in tomorrow's installment? I've been informed, but given the present state of affairs, that this might be a dangerous course of action, and yet it's straight history. There we go. Just a little. So, big applause for Archipelago. And